Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I have Vaclav Koranda, who's joining us from Malaysia. So welcome.
Hello.
So Vaclav is the Vice President of Human Resources at T-Systems in Malaysia. He's been there for, I think, over 8 years. For context, T-Systems has around 28,000 employees worldwide and is one of the leading providers of digital services. It's a Deutsche Telekom subsidiary. He holds a master's in psychology. He describes himself as a HR enthusiast. He's an innovator, keynote speaker, author, and a SHRM senior certified professional. Over the last 2 decades, Vaclav has held positions at Skoda, Enroute, and served as a university lecturer teaching personal management and creativity and teamwork. And I just found out he's just weeks away from being appointed an adjunct professor at a university in Malaysia. And the final couple of bits before we dive in is, in 2019, he was named and included in the 101 Global HR Heroes, and he received the HR Leaders Award from Malaysian Institute of HR Management in 2020. And he's named one of the most influential HR leaders in Malaysia. So a deep gratitude for your time and joining us on the show. So before we get into the background, I'd love to start with a positive focus. It's how we start actually a lot of our internal meetings. And it goes a bit like this. It's to invite you to think about a winning achievement or something you're grateful for, perhaps in work or in life over the last 2 weeks. So what are you grateful for has been an achievement as a positive focus in the last 2 weeks?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast. And it's a great pleasure for me and honor to be your guest. I would probably name a recent publication of my new book. It was not published in the past 2 weeks. It was actually published at the end of August, but was my first book basically, and it was written based on the request from, let's say, a renowned professional publishing house. So I'm really very happy that the book was published, and I hope maybe it will find, readers that will sort of profit and learn and get inspiration maybe from that book. It's essentially about HR digital transformation. I basically tried to put together a short description of what HR digital transformation is about, and then put in some cues and advice in case someone wants to implement digital transformation in their company. What are the things they need to have, where to start, and how to bring it to a successful finish. It's a short book, about 60 pages. The publishing house actually focuses on bite-size, sort of, this is the modern trend nowadays, bite-size learning and micro learning, and sort of focus on short publications. So don't expect, detailed guide from A to Z. It will tell you everything. But for someone who is facing that type of challenge for the first time, and they just need something to get orientated quickly in that area, I think it's a very good start.
Well, it's no mean feat to get a book complete and published. And in fact, I think the most read is books that are under 100 pages in the nonfiction. So they're bang on trend. I think there's a balance between either super short or really big. And in the middle is kind of no man's land. So in that book then of HR digital transformation, that you've outlined some of these things, that have you used maybe your personal experience for that, or have you researched other pieces? How did you go about curating the content in there? Because it's a big topic, right?
It is, and it was quite difficult for me to push this big topic into such a small book. But the publishing house really has a strict limit in this, and I understand. And you're completely right. The requirements of the readers change, develop, evolve, and maybe 10, 20 years ago, they expected every book to be at least 400 pages. Nowadays, it's around 100 pages. You're right. Well, I think they basically asked me based on my previous speaking engagements. I am usually invited several, like 10 to 15 times a year to various HR events. And one of the popular topics nowadays is digital transformation. And because I also have a technical background, not just human resource, I feel like I'm close to that topic and I have something to say about it. And so I thought, yeah, it's a perfect match. At T-Systems, I had a chance to implement few digital projects. It was not a full-fledged transformation. And to be honest, large companies are usually limited in ways how they can actually perform big transformations. And there is always in an IT company like that, there's a security concern, and everything has to be scrutinized very carefully. So I went for the quick and dirty approach for start, and I had a chance to work with a few interesting startups, and I made a great experience with them, because I think for anyone who wants to start to put their foot into the digital area, it's a great opportunity to work with startups. They usually have external funding, so you don't have to pay them much. At the beginning, you actually don't have to pay them at all. And they can bring in quite some interesting technology, which you would probably not be able to implement in-house. I was able to put my hands on some very interesting tools powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. And I have to say, it's a really enriching experience, and it basically elevates the HR function to a completely new level, right? Because it enables us to quantify things which we were not able to quantify before. So I found it completely logical that the publishing house asked me to write a book about this. But then when I started to dig in to the topic more deeper, I found out that I actually probably know only 50% about it. So I had to go back and start with a very diligent research. And it took me about 6 months to write these 60 pages.
Yeah.
Whenever I was talking to other people, they said, "Oh yeah, that's great. You're in this tropical country and you're writing your book, and it's hot and sunny and you can, swim in the sea and whatever not." And I was like, well, it's actually not that funny at all. If you want to write a book, you have to sort of, first of all, have quite a lot of self-control, to be honest. Because if you don't write today, then you have to write twice as much tomorrow. Otherwise, you will not meet the deadline. Sometimes, it's not like digging a trench. Sometimes you get the inspiration and the text just flows out of you, and you write 10 pages, and the next day you get stuck and you don't know how to continue. And you spend another 2 days with research because, and I'm sort of pedantic a little bit in certain areas. So, before I write something, I really want to double check that I know what I'm saying. Yeah. I'm not, there are times when you're completely down and you feel like you'll never finish it, and you're like stupid and you don't know what you've done. How could the publishing house even ask such a loser to? And then the next day you find what was the roadblock, you know, and you remove it, and you go on, and you feel great because you finish another chapter, and then you sort of well, but for me it's always like that. I am a bad starter, so I had to develop techniques how to overcome this.
It's interesting, Vaclav, you highlighted quite a few areas there that I want to dig in. The first one was the thought around digital transformation and the role in the ecosystem that different organizations have of implementing things. So startups being able to implement and pioneer maybe new technologies that you can learn from to then deploy in larger organizations to help mini pilots before, you know, wide rollouts was one part I want to dig into, is sort of that ecosystem of digital transformation, of how it functions across the sort of suppliers and providers, and then the users and organizations. And the second part that I found just really interesting listening to your story was this challenge whenever anyone faces something that they haven't done before. They need to figure out, how do I do it? You go through lots of challenges of maybe, am I capable? Why did somebody pick me? What do I need to do? Maybe I need to reform different habits. I need to give myself a break when it doesn't flow, but then when it does, capture it. And I think a lot of that, many people in their roles where they're having to reskill, upskill, things are shifting. That's happening all the time. So your lived experience around the book, I think many will resonate in. So let's start back off with your opinion and view of sort of digital transformation in terms of that maybe ecosystem between where startups play and help and support maybe larger organizations like T-Systems in being able to transform the way in which HR functions, like you say, to be better, to help and support humans be better versions of themselves. Give us a little bit of thought on that.
Well, you mentioned very rightfully that in any digital transformation, we have to apply a lot of agility and agile development techniques, and working with startups and doing pilots and prototyping is an essential part of it, because the technology is evolving very fast. If you go for the traditional approach and you try to do a big bang and you spend 2 years planning, then you find yourself at the beginning again, because something will change in the meantime. It's so it's very different transformation from I would say most of the transformations I've been through before, because of this. And it's sort of, you have to accept this kind of volatility or fuzziness of the whole thing, of the process, because if you don't, then you will never succeed. It's like shooting at a moving target, basically.
So I guess then, is that one of the key insights, that implementing small and fast repeatedly multiple times is maybe the kind of environment we're now in, rather than these big, complex, multi-year programs that, like you say, may become actually inefficient and redundant by the time you're ready to launch? Is just that approach of iterative, taking things on and having this culture of experimental, of driving innovation and learning at speed. Is that something that you've noticed has happened at within your organization? Maybe there's a few examples in T-Systems, whether it's in the L&D implementation, because I know you've run some reskilling and upskilling programs or things. What way have you managed to maybe adopt that process of short speed impacted transformations rather than those larger ones?
Well, I would say you definitely need a roadmap. It's not like you can just go randomly. You need to have a roadmap for sure, but the roadmap has to be at a higher level, and you have to be able to change it flexibly based on how the conditions change and how the environment and the technology develops. So it's not like completely random. I don't want to make that impression, but it's sort of a different way of steering. I
remember somebody mentioned this comment of learn out loud. And so when we have a plan and we're doing it, we might not know all the ways of how to do it, but we'll learn out loud as we go on and have that very transparent sharing process for it. What are some of the challenges or obstacles in operating in that way? What's been some of the difficulties maybe to have that aspiration of a high level plan and then being very sort of agile in the way of approaching? What's some of the challenges you faced in implementing that?
Well, I have to say the biggest challenge probably is that many people, especially many stakeholders, are still I don't want to resort to any sort of labeling, but let's call it traditional thinking. Just sort of their way of thinking is still very traditional, and somehow I have the feeling that the more you go to the top in terms of level, the more rigid sometimes the people are. And on one hand, it's sort of human nature. You have 30 plus years experience under your belt, and when you were younger, grass was greener and sun was brighter, and you never had a back pain. And other things, but so we tend to, and the more we, the older we grow, the more we tend to resort to things we learned in the youth, right? So it's a bit of a challenge to sort of sell this kind of a project to senior stakeholders. And if you are lucky and you have someone who trusts you that you're doing the right thing, or if you're lucky and nobody is really looking at what you're doing in certain areas, then good. But this can be sort of a cornerstone of many of these projects.
So I think one of the challenges, and so many people I talk to face the same thing, is as we expand our experience and careers, we gain experience, we gain wisdom, and we often go, that worked before, so I can do that again. And the challenge is, of course, is when either the rules of the game change or the game changes, so the environment in which we operate, how we maintain success or manage to achieve our goals before might no longer serve us. And sometimes those indicators come too late and it comes very sudden, and we're not able to actually react or respond effectively. So that challenge, you mentioned a little bit that with a wry smile there of, if you have some freedom and you have some autonomy to maybe do a few of these things in secret, in areas where people aren't looking, to balance that. So one way is, there's the obstacle. How do I get stakeholders to see things a different way? And you've got this friction and this, almost like the corporate immune system fighting you to actually say, I'm going to pop next door. I'm going to go in that other room and I'll put some things in and I'll bring back some of the results. So I think that's quite an interesting thought. And I think a lot of organizations tried this with sort of skunk works, or, placing an area where the normal governance and risk was not as enforced to allow innovation to thrive in a freer sense. Do you think that is still true, or does that need to come inside and closer to the system? Or do you still think having these sort of skunk works or sandpits where innovation can happen at the edges and fringe and not get killed? What's your view on that around, particularly within HR and HR transformation? What would you recommend or approach or have experienced in that kind of thinking?
I think it's a very broad question, and then you took another turn at the end. So I'll start from the beginning, and then let's see where it brings us. I think when it comes to innovations, and you can see in general, and you can see it in many companies, actually, there were many companies in the past that went through a typical cycle. the company was founded. It was a pioneer in something in a certain area. Then it rose to the top, and then it went through some steady phase and then decline. And although there were signs and that they need to change, somehow they were not able to change, and they perished, or they went through some sort of like Phoenix kind of a rebirth, right? The typical example is Kodak. Kodak is named in almost every speech that is regarding transformation, right? And they knew what they needed to do, but imagine. And I understand, sometimes people laugh at Kodak in a way, right? Or they take them as a negative example of how unagile a big successful company can become. And essentially, well, they did not disappear. They went to Chapter 11, and then they restructured. Some other names still, the company still exists. Actually, the name still exists, but they became such an epitome, I don't know, example of this kind of inability to change. But on the other hand, if you imagine the traditional photography business is largely chemical engineering on one hand, just all the films and photo paper and all that kind of stuff, and then mechanical and optical, which is the cameras, right? And both were actually taken by storm, by the innovation storm away. And how do you want to transform a company with tens of thousands of employees and X billions invested in the technology to something from chemical and mechanical to something that is purely digital? That's very difficult. They managed the first step, like to replace the film with the CCD sensor. But they didn't catch the next wave when the smartphones came and everything became interconnected, right? And it's difficult, I think, and I can see it in these systems as well, because IT is going through a certain life cycle as well, and you have the so-called legacy IT infrastructure, and then you have the new technologies like cloud computing and connected Internet of Things and Internet of Everything and connected cars and I don't know what. And if you are heavily invested in certain area, and suddenly there's a major disruption, it's very difficult to adapt. And I'm not looking bad at companies that are not able to do it. And sometimes I think it's just kill it and build something new aside. It's easier. You get rid of all these legacy issues.
Yeah. It's the challenge of this ambidextrous nature, a paradox where you need to exploit what you've invested in so far, but also explore what's next. And to do those two things is quite a lot of mental gymnastics. And for an organization that is this hive of operating, they need to work in harmony for sustainability. Or, as you mentioned, it's, the fire gives rebirth. The forest has a fire, then comes up rebirth, and you have these new innovations that come in. But one of the challenges I'm fascinated by is the impact on humans along the way of that. And so these people who have an identity, who have a value, who have colleagues, who have relationships that are formed, and then there's a disruption that takes place, because transformation sounds really positive. It's a great word, but the disruption and shift can be very fearful, can be very upsetting for individuals, and can be one where they then put up those barriers. I'm trying to protect something rather than trying to win something I don't have. And so those different motivations, how have you navigated that within workforces that might be motivated in different ways, or need to maybe think of different applications of their skills. How have you approached dealing with that? So whilst we've got the company technology kind of side of innovation, what about the human side of dealing with that? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my experience is that the workforce, if I should use that terms, is quite fluid or flexible when you look at the junior level and maybe mid-senior level. But when you look at the top end, you always get into trouble. You can easily reskill and upskill a fresh graduate or someone with 2-3 years experience into completely new technology. It takes time, and of course they have to have the talent and all that. But it is doable. You can't really turn an expert with 10 years experience in technology X into an expert with 10 years of experience in technology Y in 2 months retraining or reskilling program. That doesn't work. And you can't reskill them for 10 years, as you probably should, because that's not feasible from the business point of view. So we had quite a sophisticated upskilling and reskilling program, but there were always these limits, and I implemented as one part of this program. Also, there was the option to outplace the resources which we didn't have a chance to reskill. It's not like 100% foolproof solution, because maybe you don't need the legacy technology, but there is still a company that runs a few legacy systems here and there. But eventually it will die out. And I think the people, if they want to have a successful or rewarding career, if you want, they have to broaden their limits of thinking, and not just think of a particular industry or particular area of expertise, but maybe they have to be ready to do a more profound change. Like I don't know, do some pottery maybe. I'm saying it as a joke, but I mean, if you are a senior expert in something and suddenly, and the changes don't happen in hundreds of years nowadays, right? It's always like whenever there's a new technology or new invention, the adoption curve is very slow at the beginning, and then it at certain point goes like whoosh. There's this S kind of and suddenly within 1 or 2 years, everyone hops on it. That was the case with when LCD screens replaced the CRT screens, right? Suddenly, first few LCD screens appeared here and there, and they were very expensive, and then suddenly, and everybody was using LCD, and no one is using CRT TV anymore. And same was, what was the other example? Smartphones. Yes, there are a few people who still use the traditional phone with the one line display capable of showing only numbers, and they have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, and a green and a red button to pick up and hang up the call, right? But it's a very small minority, and there was a period of few years when people were switching from the traditional phones to smartphones, and nowadays everyone has a smartphone. And it's always the case with the technology. And if you don't adopt quickly, I mean, if you are really a high expert in an area, then you can't really switch in 1 year or 2 years to a completely different area. It's very difficult. So maybe you just have to find a different way how to sort of provide value to other people's lives. You know,
how to contribute. I think it brings us back to where you started in your story about writing a book, you know, and the fear of, am I capable? Can I do it? Finding days when you make some breakthroughs and other days where it feels like you're making no progress. And for that journey that people go on, you've described, the more embedded someone may be in a particular way of thinking, a particular expertise, perhaps the harder it is and more challenging it is to try different things and shift new different things. And maybe it takes a longer period of time to do that. I think what we've found in a lot of our research is some of the fundamental elements that sit behind an ability to reskill, and around things like our mindset, our level of curiosity, our ability to unlearn. And each of these components are influenced not only by our own ability or our character, but also our environment. So what level of, say, psychological safety have we got? What level of stress do we have? What level of company support can all influence and facilitate those abilities to come up? You know, how resilient is somebody? If they try something and it doesn't work, do they need help? Do they need support? Do they take a long time to come back in and say, I've now grown from that. I can reapply my problem solving to a different area, and I can contribute in society in different ways. And a lot of that, I think, comes, and what we've seen is it also is a bit viral as well. So that if we see other people being able to achieve these things, it gives us confidence by observing that change and shift. So celebrating successes of shifts or reskilling has been quite a profound shift, I know, in a number of people I've interviewed in their companies, and how they've employed really frictionless employee mobility. So they can shift from department to department, role to role with 0-day notice. And this is say S&P 500, the financial organization, employs tens of thousands of people. And they've just rethought about how people move from department to department, role to role, job to job. Normally would be a long process, right? You'd have to give you notice. You'd have to, onboard somebody to take on what you're leaving, to then go and try the other thing. And they've removed all of that. And it seemed a very brave move to just give a different environment entirely around, go and try it, go and see these things. And it's perhaps back to how we would with children, right? We'd get our children and we'd say, give it a try, play with that bit of Lego, and then next bit, play with the pen and the paper, and play with some Play-Doh. And thinking in the environment of work now, where so many things are moving, and as you say, it goes from deceptive to disruptive really quickly, maybe that sense of expert that used to carry the gravitas to now ultimate player, that is playful, that is learning, that is experimental, is maybe the new opportunity of the most valuable employees and workforces, those that can learn quick and up for learning quick, rather than have a established deep knowledge in something. Would you disagree with that? What's your thoughts on that kind of concept and thinking as we come to a final couple of questions at the end? What's your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. And I would probably rephrase it as an ability to let go. Children have a fabulous ability to let go. As you mentioned, one day they play with the ball and the other day they completely forget about the ball because it's boring. So they play with something else, And same goes for I think the right term, which is used in that sense, is emotional incontinence or something like that.
The emotional intelligence.
They smile and then something disrupts them, so they start crying, and then you engage them with an activity, so they start smiling again, although they still have tears in their eyes. So they're able to shift their emotions very quickly, whilst adult humans, I'm not sure if it's necessarily an advantage, sometimes tend to persevere a little bit too much and, like look back and, oh my God, have I not married this girl, but the other girl that time, maybe. And what is it helping you, to get stuck in the past?
It's a trait that society has rewarded around grit, to stick with something, to stick it out, to have the perseverance and passion of grit. And it can be a huge advantage, but it depends, where do we deploy that grit ability? So if that ability of being very gritty to stick something out is deployed in an area that no longer is providing value, then that grit attribute, that grit skill is actually not serving us. If we're applying that perseverance and passion to try many things, it's just a different deployment of that ability that we have. And I'm fascinated by this whole area and subject of the future of work, of how are we ensuring people aren't left behind, because there's a high risk of this happening, and that we do it where people find more light than darkness, that we can smile more when we wake up in the morning, when we go to bed, and that we feel, like you mentioned, we can contribute in some way. And I mentioned before one of the things around curiosity and being open to new things. You mentioned you put a book together, first time. And one question I ask everybody at the end is around curiosity, Vaclav, and it's, when was the last time, and it can't be the book writing because you've already shared that one, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
For the first time? I feel there is, there are so many things and so many changes. There's always something you do for the first time, like first time you go to a new restaurant, or, first time you try a different route to somewhere, or I mean, I feel like there's a lot of first times almost every day, at least for me, because, there's so many possibilities and opportunities in the world. So there's so many opportunities to do things for the first time.
That's a great mindset. It reminds me of the piece in the Bezos letters book, Jeff Bezos, where a researcher looked at all of the shareholder letters over the last 21 years. And one of the themes is it's always day one. And in Amazon, always having that mindset of it's always day one is a great kind of interesting play to have in the mind of thought of, there's so many firsts, rather than thinking, well, I've done everything, it's just on repeat. It's just the way we think and view the world. And seeing things through new eyes is another skill, isn't it? Even if it might appear on the surface as the same, we can have a new eye on it for that day to experience it for the first time. And the last piece that I'd like to ask is, if you have any kind of ideas or tips, having led large volumes of workforce through many challenges, through pandemics, through all sorts of things, what are some maybe simple tips or great questions or great things other HR leaders can be thinking about to help them in, whether it's their digital transformation or dealing with change? What could they do? What could they start doing today to help their workforce, their teams actually thrive in the kind of environment we're now living in?
Well, I have been through many leadership trainings and coachings and all this sort of thing. But there's only one thing that stuck on my mind from all this, and that's an approach that I find very useful. And I have actually seen even colleagues that I thought they were sort of resistant to change in a way how they dealt with their people, that they changed a little bit. Maybe maybe not completely, or maybe not permanently, but at least it left a trace on them. And that's this, and I won't mention the company that is promoting this because it's not, I don't think it's proper, but it's the motto or the approach which says, see people as people, see your people as people. I mean, we are all humans, right? We all have our strengths and weaknesses and joys and sorrows. And mine are, I mean, if I'm your manager, mine are as valid as yours, and vice versa. And if we apply mechanical rules, which many managers and leaders actually like to apply, then we might end up with bad solutions. But if we come or we approach the issue from, let's say, the people standpoint, like from the human standpoint, and align the motivations and what we want to achieve, then it can be a win-win situation for both. Let's go on. Maybe I will remember.
See people as people. It's very simple and very profound, isn't it? To think about a heart-led approach to, we talk about human being, not necessarily just all human doing. And one of the challenges of when we have hybrid work, remote work, it's come in, do the task. What's the task? Rather than have a human conversation, a human connection, and the connection before content is something that I picked up recently from one of the masterclasses that one of our community ran. And I felt just overwhelmed from this, next Zoom meeting, to actually, okay, let's just have a conversation before we get into the task at hand. And so I will take that see people as people, Vaclav, as a nice way to end the session. And if people want to reach out to you, other HR colleagues or things, what's the best way for them to be able to do that? And perhaps where could they get hold of the HR digital transformation book? What's the best places to go for these?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn since 2006, I think, since the inception of LinkedIn. So I have the privilege of having a very nice LinkedIn URL.
Excellent.
And it's, of course, www.linkedin.com/in/my surname. So simple as that. Yep. Feel free to connect with me, and you will also find the link to the book at the bottom of my profile in the publication section.
Fantastic. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you and for you to share some of your insights and thoughts with our community. So I'm eternally grateful. Thank you.
And you have been a wonderful host. Thank you very much.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalized report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code podcast65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams, and organizations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.